Hello, and welcome again to Thresholds. Thresholds is a podcast where, through the lenses of spirituality and religion, therapy and shamanic practice, we reflect upon the experiences that people have as they grieve. I'm Susan Hollins, and I'm a grief therapist and shamanic practitioner living in Fife, close to sea and to forest. And today I am very pleased and delighted that Tina Naldret has joined me all the way from Devon. And we're going to be talking about perhaps slightly unusual aspects of grief that people experience. But first of all, let Tina introduce herself. Tina, welcome.
Thank you for such a lovely, warm welcome, Susan. I'm Tina, and I live in Dawlish, as yourself, quite close to the sea. I'm a nurse by background. I'm also a celebrant, and that's often when I'm in spaces where I'm talking about death and dying and grief. And I'm also a hypnotherapist. So often I work with people in parts of themselves that they don't always use in their everyday.
That sounds very mysterious, and I'm very curious about that. But also want to mention, if you don't mind me saying this, that you used to work in a hospice where you would have come across in your working life um, dying people and their loved ones.
Yes, that's right. I worked as a nurse in lots of places where there was death throughout my long career. I worked with older people for a long time, and on those wards, that was often the care that we were giving, and then moved to work in the hospice sector for 6 years at the end of my career. Incredibly rewarding and special time.
Yes, yes. I can imagine that was so. And I remember my own time of working in the NHS, supporting people who were dying and their relatives, and then perhaps sometimes conducting the funeral of the person who died in the hospital, though that didn't happen that often. They are profound experiences, but equally profoundly rewarding.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, today we're going to be discussing together, having a bit of a natter, Tina and I, about words beginning with UN. I've called them the unwords, which seem to be very pertinent to people's experience of grief. And we're going to be wandering around and through them in this podcast today. So, underworld, undone, unheard, unconscious, unseen, misunderstood, unspeakable, untouchable. And when you hear those words, Tina, what springs to your heart and mind?
It makes me think a lot about silent places, hidden places, and almost invisibility. Makes
Mm,
me think about things like that. And I was reminded of a poem, if I may be so bold for your listeners,
of course.
um, called Love Song by Rainer Marie Rilke. It's quite old, and it's was originally in the German, but it says, "How can I keep in my soul in me, so that it doesn't touch your soul? How can I raise it high enough past you to other things? I would like to shelter it among remote lost objects in some dark and silent place that doesn't resonate with your depths, resound. Yet everything that touches us, me and you, takes us together like a violin's bow, which draws one voice out of two separate strings. Upon that instrument we are spanned, and what musician holds us in his hand?" And when we were talking, I was reminded of that, and that particularly that line, "I would like to shelter it among remote lost objects in some dark and silent place." Because when I think of grief, I often think of people holding back and either not being conscious, so being unconscious of that, holding back, that taking their grief to another place, or about us as a society not noticing it, not looking in its direction. Yeah, it makes me think about that a little bit.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, and what Rilke is saying, though I haven't heard that poem ever before, and he does write very beautifully and poignantly a lot of the time. But I wonder if this relates to two different words. Not that I'm trying to be tidy and make everything relate and connect, because I'm not, but something in relation to the unconscious, and also to grieving people feeling as if they are untouchable, or worse, infected by this thing called grief, and therefore they will infect other people with how they're feeling.
Yes. And I certainly have seen people who are working really hard to put on a brave face. Maybe that's a phrase I've heard many a time.
Oh, indeed. Yes,
or
yes,
or behave a certain way in front of other people for the comfort of those other people.
yes,
Yeah, and I mean, this has probably happened to you, Susan, but I've been with people who've been very bon ami and getting on with it and offering everyone tea and cake, and then other people have left the room, and when asked, they've said, I'm just holding it together now. I just feel this isn't the time and place for me to talk about my loss.
yes,
And often they'll be with family and friends.
yes.
It leaves me with the question, when is the time?
Yes, I've, my goodness, I've heard that said to me by grieving persons so often. I'm just holding it together. And yes, the gathering after the funeral, over tea and cakes or whatever it might be, holding it together, because now is not the time for the person to break down into into a tearful mess.
Mm.
But you're right. When is the right time? And there isn't a right time, is there? Um, but coming back to this sense of being contagious, it's almost as if it works both ways. Because I remember many years ago, elderly lady whose husband had died. She said, you know, I don't want to infect other people with the way I'm feeling,
Mm.
and she felt
What's
so awful emotionally, psychologically, because of her grief, and that she didn't want to infect her closest family, friends,
mm.
and so she abstained from social events. So here we are. Here is grief isolating us, isolating people, because they feel so wretched that they fear to make other people feel wretched too. Um, and then there's the other aspect of that. I'm just holding it together, which is, well, I've got to keep holding it together, because if I don't hold it together, I might break open so much that I might never be able to be put back together again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because in literature that goes back many years, people used to use the phrase undone, I am undone,
Yes.
unraveling, incomplete and not put together. And I think sometimes people's life journeys may have taken them through other griefs when they have been in turmoil inside, but they haven't been able to express it. I'm thinking of potentially after miscarriage, for example,
Yes.
perhaps somebody who they've always wanted children, but that was a grief or a loss they couldn't achieve. And therefore that just hasn't been talked about, because they have to just present themselves as untroubled by all of this thing and getting on with life and coping. Yeah, I mean, death is the obvious loss that, because there's usually a ceremony and it's so public and it's so obvious. I don't think many people can avoid some conversations about it. But some of the other losses, we've just held on to those, and perhaps that's our learning, that society expects us to do that.
It does, and sadly that's still the case. And it's only very, very recently that laws have been changed in England, haven't they, relating to um, bereavement leave following a pregnancy loss,
Mm,
which includes fathers as well.
yeah.
Um, and again, when I worked in the NHS, uh, in acute hospitals, um, my colleagues and I were, there was hardly a week that went by when we were not engaged in the support of a family who had lost a baby, whether through miscarriage, whether through the ending of the pregnancy for uh, very serious medical reasons,
Hmm.
or through stillbirth or a neonatal death, which is when the child would have gone home with them probably, and then died in the early uh, days and weeks. But it was a very, I'm going to say common. It wasn't common. It was frequent. But the awful thing was that, whereas with a stillborn baby, there was a funeral. Um, the hospitals I worked in did offer funerals for um, early pregnancy losses from 16 weeks upwards,
Hmm.
but for pregnancy losses of less than 16 weeks, there was no funeral ritual of
Mm,
any kind.
yeah.
And then it's an unseen, unspoken loss.
Yeah, and the
And
grief can be immense.
the
I
grief
mean,
can be absolutely
yeah,
mind-blowingly immense. Yes.
yeah, because lots of people have tried a long time to achieve that pregnancy potentially, and it, the loss of a pregnancy, people get, they're getting to the stage even before 12 weeks where they're beginning to think, yes, this is real,
Yes.
and soon other people will know, and my body will change significantly so others can see. So it already feels like something that will be sustained. And I think when it isn't, society almost stigmatizes the talking about it, and downgrades it a little bit. But all loss of children and infants, I think, is so hard, because it's another layer of, let's not talk about this. The hurt must be extreme, so we mustn't talk about it. And in doing a funeral for a child, an infant who died, about a month old, um, when we talked about it, they hadn't given the infant a name because they thought that would be the outcome and they weren't sure what to do. And we talked about having a moment of naming in the ceremony, which
Yes.
you may have done this as well, Susan, as
Yes.
well as a
Yes.
moment of saying goodbye and
Hmm.
grieving the loss.
Yes. When we were supporting parents with the earlier type of pregnancy loss, we where it was possible to do so, we offered what we called a naming and blessing
Mm,
ceremony, which was done on the ward, so that the parents, if they wanted to, could give the baby a name. And then they would have a little certificate, little piece of paper to say that this is what had happened, and this is the name that they had chosen for their
mm,
baby. Um, and that was just so important. And I remember, gosh, it was in my last NHS appointment as a healthcare chaplain, and um, a lady got in touch with me who had had a stillbirth many years before, and the loss had derailed her to a great extent psychologically, and she'd always tried to find out what had happened to her baby because although the baby was stillborn, she was never offered a funeral. And because it was some time before these changes, these beneficial
Mm-hmm.
changes had come into place. So I worked with this person for quite some months, and we eventually we gained her medical records, and were able to see in the records, this the birth of this baby, and its sex and everything, as much information as we could possibly gather. But there was still no burial place for this baby. So what happened was that I invited her and her partner to the hospital chapel one afternoon, and I had created for them a simple service of naming and remembering. I can't remember what else, I can't remember the detail, but it was a means of recognizing that this little person had come into the world, um, and was the child of loving parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the grief this person had been through was immense because it had not been recognized. Her loss had not been recognized. It had been dismissed all the way along. So, there we are, unheard, unseen,
Mm.
misunderstood, and what she carried was sort of unspeakable in the sense of the immensity of her grief. And also untouchable because nobody really wanted to bother with her to find out what had happened. So she had to rattle a few cages, and I helped her with that.
Yeah, and where does your mind go, and what do you think when you're in that situation and that lady found herself about where your lost child is?
Well, I think it's many years ago now, and can't. I have to say I can't remember all the detail, and I
Mm.
apologise for that because that to the listeners that might be unhelpful. But I have a remembrance that the child was located in some cemetery, but it
Ah.
was not. But it was not an individual grave.
And I suppose, Susan,
So
there'd be many. Yeah.
there was no cemetery record for this child.
Mm.
If it had been an individual grave, there would have been a cemetery record, baby, whatever the baby's name was.
Yeah.
But the baby must have been put into a common grave with other babies, so there was no record individually.
And I suppose it's to kind of move that out into thinking about other people's moments of loss, is that not everyone does have a moment with the deceased, because there are circumstances in which that's not possible. Maybe you're lost at sea.
Yes.
I have worked with somebody whose person was lost at sea. I also had the incredible privilege of nursing around the time, the aftermath really of the Lockerbie disaster, for listeners who remember that tragic air accident over the town of Lockerbie in Scotland.
Yes.
And I was working in that area as a mental health nurse at the time. In fact, I was training, and lots of people were doing the therapeutic support of both the care workers afterwards, both NHS and paramedics, but also of the community in general. And for quite a few of those people, there was no remains. There was no person to embrace or take to another place and find a final resting place of whatever description. So that was a very interesting time to see how they made sense of that. The kind of idea that the earthly boundaries have gone from that life, but then does the person have any presence? How does that work
Yes.
as they navigated their loss and their grief?
Yes.
I do remember a particular gentleman, because there was a support group, and a lot of the people who'd had a loss had lost somebody through the accident itself, but his daughter that evening had had a car accident, and hadn't got emergency service to her in time due to the fact they were dealing with this situation.
Yes.
And so he had a loss, but it wasn't in his mind as important as the other ones.
Oh.
I know.
Oh.
It was very interesting, in the way he spoke about it. He said, of course, I can't compare my loss to yours.
Dear
My
me.
loss isn't as significant as yours.
But his daughter had died.
People were very beautiful around him, very compassionate in talking him through his loss being just as significant as anybody else's.
Of course.
But, yeah.
Yes. Yes. The more I work in the area and the enormous field of grief, the increasingly aware I'm becoming of so many sort of hidden facets of it that that all, other people might not always pick up on, which is why we're having this conversation about words beginning with UN in relation to underworld and being undone and not being unheard and unseen, because grieving people have said to me that they after a while they have a real sense that closest family, friends stop hearing them, and they no longer see them in the way that they did. So in the sense that it may be a few months on since their loved one died, so the assumption is, oh well, aren't they getting things together by now a little bit?
Yeah.
And and therefore not seeing or hearing the grieving person as that, but rather, well, we'd love this, we'd love James or Jim to get back to how they were. We're really keen for them to come back to how they were. And they're unable to see James, Jim, Jane, Jim in the way that they actually are in the present without their partner
Yes.
or their special.
And it's so difficult to navigate that, isn't there? I remember a lady saying to me once that she found it really upsetting that about 3 months after the loss of her husband, they were members of a bridge club, and the bridge club had been super supportive up until this moment, apparently, when they said to her, well, I suppose you won't be coming as often now, if at all, because you haven't got a bridge partner.
So a whole social world goes.
Yeah, I think it was a real lifeline for her. And then she was thinking, well, am I not supposed to go then? Yes, I don't have my bridge partner, and it's bad enough going and knowing I'm not playing with him, but I had hoped that I could still go and be with somebody else who was free.
Yes.
So, yeah, it was very interesting assumption that she just wouldn't go because she didn't have him to go with.
Yes.
And on a positive note, I suppose, a helpful thing for people to hear is I was with another lady a while after her loss. She decided, her husband was a keen gardener, and 6 months after he died, she decided to have a plant sale and for the contributions to go to the charity that had supported him during his last days. And I went round to the plant sale, so I saw her, and between when he died and that moment had been Christmas. And I said, and she'd been slightly dreading it, she said, that time of year, that social gaiety when he wasn't going to be around. And I asked her how it was, and she said, "Oh, do you know one of the nicest things? I had a card from somebody, and they put his name in it. They
Oh,
said, for example, Mary and John, Merry
yes,
Christmas. I'm sure you'll always be Mary and John to me, and I'm sure you're thinking of him a lot." And she said it was just so lovely
yes,
because a lot of my cards just said Mary.
yes,
She said,
yes.
so it was a lovely thing for someone to write his name in a card.
Really lovely, thoughtful, touching
Mm.
thing to have done. Um,
And I think she used those words that we're speaking of. She said, I felt really seen by that friend. Like she
yes,
really knew that this was hard. When other
yes.
people were saying things like, aren't you doing well? You're having a plant sale. Look, you're getting
Oh,
on with it.
yeah. Oh dear.
I
Yes,
know.
yes, yes. In some of my other threshold pieces, the podcast and the um, essays that I put up on Substack, I started off by describing different aspects of what I understand as an underworld that we are plunged into when we are grieving, when somebody we love dies, whether the person we love has died suddenly in whatever way, or we've had ages of notice, and then it's happened. And I started this off because, again, in relation to the work I do with grieving people and supporting and resourcing them, their experiences often tell of this frightening underworld into which they've been plunged,
Mm-hmm.
which is a completely alien landscape with neither signpost nor map nor compass, and they're expected to kind of stumble their way from one part of it to another. And this then set me thinking about, classical myths and legends about people's experiences in the underworld, that they go hunting for their loved one. Thinking of Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice dies very unexpectedly, and she goes to the underworld, um, ruled over by Hades, and Orpheus gains permission to enter the underworld to go and regain Eurydice, which is unheard of. Um, and he is given permission, and Eurydice is given permission to leave on the condition that Orpheus does not look back, he doesn't turn round as he makes his way through Hades back to the entrance, and that he has to trust that Eurydice is behind him. And he manages to get so far, and he's very close to the entrance back into the ordinary world when he can bear it no longer, and he turns, and she disappears
Mm.
back into the underworld. Um, and but the experience of many grieving people whom I've supported or whom I've known over the years has been of being in this strange, very alien and frightening landscape within themselves, that their emotions are no longer ones that they know. They've not had these emotions before, and they don't feel the same physically, not least because they don't get the sleep that they had, but
Mm.
the whole system is out of joint. And yet, as we've already touched on, the societal assumption is that, well, they're up, you know, they're looking after themselves, so they must be all right. But inwardly, it's an entirely different experience. And it's that which some of my clients bring to me. But it's a frightening, frightening experience. Have you come across that?
I have, and I think because people don't talk about it, a lot of the people having that experience believe that they're having that experience in isolation. And they don't
Yes.
want to say anything out loud because they're frightened that it might make them appear a little crazy or something of that nature. But I've heard lots of people say things along the lines of, I feel their presence, I'm sure they're in the room. I think I heard their voice. I had somebody once who said, it's so strange. Sometimes my hearing changes as if I'm underwater. And
Mm.
I just feel so disengaged with the world. I feel like I'm just floating through it.
Yes.
And I could almost look outside a window into the room and see myself doing this.
Yes.
Really a disassociated feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and feeling like just that someone is there around you, but feeling it keenly, like the same feeling you would have if another human walked into the room in bodily form and you'd know they were there.
Yes.
But people don't often speak of that. And signs, people saying, oh, it was such a sign that I said to him, I miss you so much. Just give me any kind of sign. And I
Mm.
went in the bedroom, his tie was on the bed.
Yes.
He
Yes.
said, now I know I put it away, but if I tell anyone that, Tina, they're going to think I'm bonkers. So, people having these sort of experiences, but never sharing them with anybody else. I think the most powerful story I ever heard from somebody, Susan, was through hypnotherapy. And this was somebody who kept sleepwalking. And she didn't know, her waking self didn't know she was sleepwalking, apart from the fact that things were moved around in the house. And she felt utterly exhausted all the time, like she wasn't getting any sleep. And she lived on her own, left the place tidy, but knew that things had moved. So she
Right.
said, I was absolutely convinced I was sleepwalking. And she explained that when her partner had died, they had been asleep together and she had awoken to him having died.
Mm.
And although she wasn't in the same bedroom, she said, I think it's to do with that. So we just explored what her unconscious mind might be doing, might be thinking, how it might be trying to manage this situation for her, because that's
Yes.
a very horrible thing to happen.
Yes.
And she came to the conclusion herself, really, but with a little bit of help, that she maybe was looking for him. Maybe in some deep, deep level, this nighttime restlessness, this worry about going to sleep and what would happen when she was asleep, had created this in her, this, restless self at night.
Yes.
And maybe she was looking for him.
I was going to
And
say, was she looking for him?
yeah,
Yes.
that's what she concluded.
Yes.
So we just talked that through. What would she say if she found him? What 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 would it feel like to look for him in a different way that was more restful for her?
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, and just left those suggestions with her, which, to be honest, hypnotherapy is mainly about creating suggestions that your inner self can believe and you can work on.
Yes.
And that worked for her. She managed to start to sleep through the night.
Good. That sounds really wonderful work to have done, if I can call it work. And it's the engagement of the imagination, isn't it? As well,
Yes, that's right.
because I worked with a client a while back, and I encouraged them to be imaginative in how they engaged with their perception of their loved one, and the the outcome, the therapeutic outcome for this person was remarkably super.
Mm,
It made such a qualitative difference, because their loved one had died in a motorbike accident,
mm,
and um, and they died many years before this person came to me as a client, and but towards the latter part of the therapy with me, it was about using their imagination, and that, as I say, that reaped massive therapeutic benefit
mm.
for them.
Yeah.
Kind of gained a life of its own that was organic and utterly congruent with the person's needs. And I say it was a really positive therapeutic outcome. Made such
Yes.
a difference to them.
And I remember working with a young woman years ago who used to sit outside on the back step and have a cup of tea with her dad, usually at
Oh,
the very end of the day, if the
yes,
weather was nice. And they would look at the sky together and comment on the stars. And that was because he worked shifts and he was always home really, really late. And she just loved the fact she would have a little bit of time with him. So she sometimes used to stay up to do that. And after his loss, we were talking about, she just felt like there were so many. She'd had a very last minute call, as some people do, saying, can you get home soon? And she hadn't got home, in her view, in time to be
yes.
there at the end.
Mm.
And so we talked about, how she could have those conversations with him. What would that look like? And she said, well, I sit on the step and I think about him. I said, but you could chat to him out
Yeah.
loud. And she said, well, I don't know. What if people looked over the fence? It would be fine. So, there's that as well, that we do a lot inside our minds, don't we? That inner dialogue and
We
the
do, but
okay.
it's so
Yeah.
good and releasing to talk out loud
Mm,
to the person we love who has died. Talking to a photograph or
mm.
an item they used, or just remembering them, but talking out loud on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
It's not about, that's nothing to do with being out of our minds. It's actually allowing the relationship to find a different balance, because they come with us. Our loved ones who have died come with us, not in a physical sense, but inwardly. And one of the important aspects of grieving is not that we stop grieving. Grief changes as we change. It changes us. We change. It changes. But that we, if at all possible, we're able to reach a point where we say, I know exactly where, my loved one is. I carry them in this here within me, and
Mm,
they might have a particular place. Again, a special place that might have been to for a holiday, or somewhere inside the house, or wherever it might be. But that is where their loved one is, and they are able then to continue the relationship with them into their physical future.
yeah.
Um, One of the grief therapists, brain boxers, calls it continuing bonds. That's the posh term for it. But it's
Yeah.
how we can create continuing bonds of affection and relationship with the person, because
Mm,
we don't leave them behind. They come with us, and that's where imagination is just so important. But that doesn't happen in the early stages,
no.
um, because our brains are so consumed with the shock and the terribleness of being without them. That kind of ability only begins to return to us after quite some time has gone by.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of a few things when you say that. I know a friend who is quite a spiritual person and believes that her mum's spirit comes to her from time to time, but not always in a convenient moment. So she she made me laugh when she said that so much. And she said, so I've kind of set up this arrangement with my mum where I'm like, Mum, if I'm driving on my own in the car, you're very welcome to join me, and I will chat about my day, and she said, I often talk out loud to her in the car when I'm on my own. I'll say, oh, Mum, you never believe what happened, and your
Oh,
advice would be welcome, and such
oh,
like. It's lovely, isn't it?
yes, it
And she
is.
said, I just have created this car as a safe space for
Yes,
that to happen, which
yes,
feels really good. And then I was thinking, as you were talking, Susan, about introducing somebody who's died to someone who never met them. So I spoke to somebody else who's got a grandma box for her children who have never met the grandma because she died before their arrival. And because this person wants them to have some sort of relationship with her mum as was, she said, on mum's birthday, we get the grandma box out and we we just look at some of her stuff, her
Yes.
photographs. She liked a fancy shoe, so we get the shoes out and the kids sometimes wear them. She said,
Pluck it
they
around.
usually want to have cake. And she said, that whole trying to create a legacy of
Yes.
that bond. So,
But
yeah.
that again, and not because I want to be tidy, but it is about, this all relates to the UN words.
Mm,
So we're using aspects of our unconscious to help us to come to terms with the loss, that we won't see our loved
mm,
one on the planet again, and finding resources to live as positively as possible, not positively, as constructively as possible in the strange landscape of grief.
yeah.
But also, when we do talk out loud to our loved ones in those special places, we're actually validating our own experience as well as the life of the person who has died, aren't
Mm,
we?
mm,
Where we are seeing not only ourselves, but also them.
yeah. Making space for it, aren't we? Where
Yes,
often we live in a world where people think we didn't ought to do that. We ought to not give it that space.
yes,
Mm.
yes. We're almost coming to the end of our time for today, but I just wonder, Tina, if you have any golden nuggets to offer listeners who may have found some of this conversation relevant to their own experience.
Mhm.
If they were sitting in your room now, what might you like to say to them? What might you like to give them, to gift them?
I think I would like to say there is no wrong or right way. There is only your own way. And to not feel any judgment about whatever your experience is and where it's taking you. And if you're managing that in your own way and life is doable, then that's all good. But if it's getting in the way of life being doable, then do reach out for help. Lots of people like Susan and others are there to just guide you through, hold your hand a little bit as you go through the experience of making a bit more sense of it.
Yes, and thank you for that. Not everybody needs to see a grief therapist or to join a support group. There's lots of online resources that people can tap into as well. But you're dead right. When the grief burden becomes so much that we can't function, um, we're still not eating and sleeping properly after a year and more, then it is time to look for outside support that will understand. And back to you won't leave feeling seen and unheard. You will be most certainly seen and heard and understood.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Tina. It's been really lovely to talk with you again, as ever. I really welcome these conversations, and I hope we might do another one at some point in the future
Yeah.
on another grief-related topic, because it's not often that you can find someone who you can talk about this very, very important area of human life with. It's
Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. What a privilege. And I hope the listeners find it helpful. It's been a great to meander through this topic with you.
Thank you. I love meandering. It's good to meander. Thank you, Tina. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and until next time.